What if the dream of living close to your grandchildren, being part of their daily lives, and having family just minutes away could actually become one of the loneliest and most emotionally exhausting decisions of your later years? It sounds counterintuitive, even shocking, but today we're going to explore why moving near your adult children might not be the warm, fulfilling solution many of us imagine, and what truly makes relationships thrive across generations. Let me be clear from the start. This isn't about not loving your children or grandchildren. It's not about choosing isolation over connection. It's about understanding that physical proximity and emotional closeness are not the same thing. And sometimes, the healthiest family relationships actually require a little breathing room. The cultural narrative tells us that moving near our kids in retirement is the natural, loving choice. We imagine Sunday dinners becoming weekly traditions, spontaneous visits with grandchildren, being there for the important moments, and having built-in support as we age. These dreams aren't wrong, and for some families, close proximity works beautifully. But for many others, the reality turns out quite different from the fantasy. And understanding why can help you make a more informed decision about your own situation. Let's start with something subtle but significant: the gradual erosion of boundaries. When you live across town or in another state, visits are planned events with natural beginnings and endings. There's a rhythm to the connection. But when you live 5 minutes apart, those boundaries blur almost imperceptibly. Your daughter stops by unannounced because she's nearby. You pop over to drop something off and end up staying for 3 hours. Your son assumes you're available to watch the kids because, well, you're right there, and what else are you doing? At first, this feels wonderful. You're needed, you're involved, you're part of the daily fabric of their lives. But over time, something shifts. The visits that once felt special become routine. The favors that were occasional become expected. You find yourself adjusting your schedule constantly to accommodate their needs, and saying no starts to feel awkward or even guilt-inducing. One woman described it perfectly when she said, "Proximity turned her from a cherished visitor into background furniture, always there, always available, gradually taken for granted." The challenge is that these boundary violations happen so gradually that nobody notices until resentment has already built up. Your kids don't realize they're overstepping because the lines were never clearly drawn. You don't speak up because you don't want to seem unloving or difficult. But internally, you're exhausted and feeling like your time and space are no longer truly your own. Consider Martha, who moved from Arizona to be near her son's family in Oregon. Within 6 months, she found herself providing childcare 3 days a week. Not because she'd agreed to this arrangement, but because it had evolved organically. Her son and daughter-in-law both worked demanding jobs. Childcare was expensive, and Martha was right there. She loved her grandchildren, but she'd also had plans for retirement, travel, hobbies, volunteer work. Those dreams slowly evaporated as she became the default childcare solution. When she finally tried to set boundaries, the conversation became tense and guilt-laden on both sides. Everyone felt hurt and misunderstood. This leads directly to the second major challenge: the assumption of caregiving responsibilities. When families live close together, there's often an unspoken expectation of mutual support. Adult children assume parents will help with childcare, household emergencies, or simply being an extra pair of hands. Meanwhile, as parents age, children begin anticipating they'll need to provide care and support in return. Neither generation explicitly agrees to these roles, they just evolve. The problem is that caregiving, whether for grandchildren or aging parents, requires enormous emotional and physical energy. When it becomes an obligation rather than a freely chosen gift, it breeds resentment. You might find yourself providing free childcare when you'd rather be taking an art class. Your children might feel trapped, unable to relocate for better job opportunities because you're nearby and increasingly dependent on their help. Everyone ends up feeling simultaneously responsible for and burdened by the other. Frank moved near his daughter after his wife passed, seeking comfort and connection in his grief. His daughter welcomed him warmly, helping him find an apartment just blocks from her house. But as the months passed, Frank noticed his daughter checking in constantly, sometimes multiple times a day. Was he eating well? Taking his medications? Had he been outside? Her concern came from love, but it also came from proximity-fueled anxiety. She could see his lights on late at night and would text asking if everything was okay. She'd notice if his car hadn't moved in a few days and would drop by to investigate. Frank found himself feeling monitored rather than supported, losing the sense of independence that had defined his entire adult life. This brings us to the third challenge: constant availability. In our hyper-connected age, living nearby means you're always theoretically reachable. A text asking if you can watch the kids for a few hours feels harder to decline when they're 10 minutes away versus 10 hours. A call asking you to run an errand because you're closer to that store than they are seems like a small favor, but these small favors accumulate into a significant drain on your time and energy. The hidden exhaustion of constant availability is real. You never fully relax because there's always a possibility that you'll be called upon. You start planning your days around potential interruptions. You hesitate to make commitments because you might need to be available for family. One grandfather described it as feeling like he was perpetually on call, never truly off duty from family obligations. The fourth challenge involves something precious: your autonomy. As we age, well-meaning adult children often begin making decisions for us rather than with us. When they live far away, they have less opportunity to intervene in daily choices. But when they're nearby and visiting frequently, they notice everything. They see what you're eating and suggest dietary changes. They notice you're driving less confidently and hint about giving up your car keys. They observe that your house isn't as tidy as it once was and start talking about downsizing or hiring help. Again, these concerns usually come from genuine love and worry, but they can feel infantilizing and controlling. You're still a fully competent adult capable of making your own decisions. But proximity gives your children both more information and more opportunities to express concern. Before you know it, you're defending choices that shouldn't require defense, from what time you go to bed to whether you really need that second cup of coffee. Helen moved near her son specifically because she was developing some mobility issues and wanted support nearby. But within a year, she felt like her son had become her manager rather than her child. He arranged her doctor's appointments, decided what medications she should take, determined when she needed a walker, and eventually convinced her to move into a smaller, more manageable apartment without fully considering what she wanted. His intentions were good, but Helen felt like she'd traded independence for proximity, and the cost was higher than she'd anticipated. The fifth challenge is perhaps unexpected. Your social life often shrinks dramatically when you move to be near your children. You leave behind the community you've built over years or decades, the friends who knew you before you were primarily someone's parent or grandparent, the familiar places and routines that gave your life texture and meaning. You arrive in a new location where your primary social connection is your family. Initially, you might think this is fine. You have built-in companionship with your kids and grandkids. But family can't be your entire social world, especially when those family members have their own busy lives, jobs, friends, and obligations. You need peers, people in your own life stage who share your interests and availability. You need friendships that exist independently of your role as parent or grandparent, relationships where you're simply yourself. But building new friendships in your 60s, 70s, or 80s in an unfamiliar place is genuinely difficult. The natural friendship-building structures of earlier life, workplaces, kids' schools, young family neighborhoods, no longer exist. You might find yourself spending most of your time with family simply because they're your only social option, which can intensify the boundary and autonomy issues we've already discussed. Dorothy moved from Florida to Minnesota to be near her daughter's family. She left behind her book club, her water aerobics friends, her volunteer work at the local animal shelter, her weekly dinner group. In Minnesota, she struggled to find her footing. The weather was harder on her arthritis. She didn't know where anything was. Her daughter was wonderful, but busy with work and 3 active kids. Dorothy found herself spending long stretches alone in her apartment, realizing too late that she'd traded a rich, full life for proximity to family who, while loving, couldn't possibly fill all the social and emotional space her old community had occupied. The sixth challenge involves emotional fatigue from over-involvement. When you're deeply embedded in your children's daily lives, you're also embedded in their stresses, conflicts, and problems. You hear about every work frustration, every parenting challenge, every marital tension. This can be exhausting. Distance provides a natural filter where you stay connected to the important things without being dragged into every daily drama. Living nearby, you might find yourself becoming an unwitting participant in dynamics you'd rather avoid. You're present for arguments. You witness parenting styles you don't agree with but feel you can't comment on. You're privy to more information about your children's marriages and lives than is perhaps healthy for anyone. The emotional load of being this entwined in their everyday reality can become surprisingly heavy. The seventh challenge is that proximity can actually intensify family conflicts rather than resolve them. Distance often acts as a buffer that allows small irritations to dissipate. When you see family less frequently, you're more likely to overlook minor annoyances and focus on enjoying the time together. But when you're in constant contact, every difference in values, every parenting disagreement, every old family dynamic has more opportunities to surface and create friction. That comment about how you're raising your grandchildren that you might have bitten back during a short visit becomes harder to suppress when you're there 3 times a week. Your daughter's messiness that you could overlook during a weekend visit becomes a constant irritation when you're at her house regularly. These accumulated tensions can damage relationships that distance might have protected. The eighth challenge involves something called double uprooting. You move once to be near your children, leaving behind your established life. But adult children are mobile. Jobs change, opportunities arise. They might move again for career advancement or their own family needs. Where does that leave you? You've already sacrificed your community and established life once. Do you uproot again to follow them? Or do you stay in a place that was only ever meaningful because they were there, now finding yourself isolated in a location you never chose for its own merits? This happened to Robert, who moved from his longtime home in Texas to Colorado to be near his son's family. 3 years later, his son received an incredible job offer in North Carolina and relocated. Robert faced an agonizing choice: move again, at 78, to an even more unfamiliar place, or stay in Colorado where he'd never quite established roots beyond his son's family. He stayed and spent years regretting both the initial move and his decision not to follow them again. He felt adrift, having twice sacrificed his own anchoring for proximity that proved temporary. The ninth challenge is that overdependence, which can flow both directions, ultimately limits growth and opportunity for both generations. Adult children might hesitate to pursue career opportunities that would require relocating because they feel responsible for nearby aging parents. Parents might suppress their own desires to travel, pursue new interests, or even relocate somewhere they genuinely prefer because they feel obligated to remain available for their children and grandchildren. This mutual constraint, even when unspoken, can breed resentment over time. Your son passes on his dream job because he doesn't want to leave you alone. You stay put when you'd love to winter in a warmer climate because you feel you should be available for the grandkids. Nobody's fully free to make choices based solely on what's best for them, and that limitation affects everyone's happiness and fulfillment. The 10th and perhaps most important insight is this: the quality of family relationships depends far more on intention than proximity. Some of the closest, most loving families live hours or states apart, but maintain connection through regular calls, thoughtful visits, and genuine presence during the time they do spend together. Meanwhile, some families living minutes apart drift into patterns of obligation and routine that drain the joy from their interactions. When visits are less frequent, they tend to be more intentional. Everyone makes an effort. You plan activities. You're genuinely present rather than half distracted. There's excitement and newness rather than the taken-for-granted quality that constant contact can create. Sometimes, a little distance actually strengthens bonds by ensuring that time together remains special. So, what does all this mean for you if you're considering moving near your adult children, or if you've already made that move and are struggling with some of these challenges? First, recognize that acknowledging difficulties doesn't mean you don't love your family. It means you're being honest about the complexities of these relationships and your own needs as an independent adult. If you're considering a move, have explicit conversations about expectations before making such a significant decision. What kind of contact frequency feels right to everyone? What help, if any, are you willing and able to provide? What support might you need as you age? How will boundaries be maintained? These conversations feel awkward, but they're essential for preventing the unspoken assumptions that lead to resentment. If you've already moved and are experiencing some of these challenges, it's not too late to reset boundaries and expectations. Have honest, loving conversations about what's working and what isn't. Assert your right to your own life, schedule, and choices. Cultivate friendships and activities outside your family circle. Use tools like planners or calendars to protect time for your own interests and to set clear boundaries around your availability. Remember that maintaining your independence, your friendships, your routines, and your sense of self isn't selfish. It's essential. You're not just someone's parent or grandparent. You're a whole person with your own needs, interests, and right to a fulfilling life. The healthiest family relationships happen when everyone involved is living fully, bringing their best selves to the connection rather than sacrificing themselves for it. Love doesn't require constant proximity. Sometimes it flourishes best with a little space, where visits remain joyful rather than obligatory, where help is freely offered rather than expected, where everyone maintains the independence that allows them to show up as their fullest, happiest selves. Your later years should be peaceful, fulfilling, and authentically yours. Whether that happens near your children or at a comfortable distance depends entirely on your specific family dynamics, personalities, and needs. There's no single right answer. Only the answer that honors both your love for your family and your right to a life that brings you joy and meaning. If this perspective resonated with you or challenged some assumptions you've been holding, share it with others navigating these complex family decisions. Subscribe for more honest conversations about the realities of aging and family relationships. Leave a comment sharing your own experiences with proximity to adult children, whether positive or challenging. Your story might help someone else make a more informed decision or feel less alone in their struggles. Until next time, remember that the best relationships at any distance are built on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the freedom to be fully yourself.